The forest ranger station sat in silence, surrounded by miles of dense woodland. It was past midnight when Marcus looked up from his paperwork, the only sound the soft hum of the generator outside. He had worked this remote post for nearly a decade, and the solitude had become a companion he understood. But tonight, something felt different. The air held a strange stillness, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Then he heard it, a soft, deliberate scratching at the wooden door. Not the random brush of wind-blown branches or the scurrying of a small animal. This was purposeful, insistent. Marcus set down his pen and listened, his pulse quickening. The scratching came again, slower this time, accompanied by a sound he couldn't quite place, a low, labored breathing. He stood carefully, his chair scraping against the floor. The station's porch light was off, leaving only the pale glow of moonlight filtering through the windows. Marcus grabbed a flashlight from the shelf and moved toward the door, each step measured and quiet. His training told him to be cautious. Wild animals near human structures at night usually meant injury, disease, or desperation. None of those scenarios were safe. He turned the handle slowly and pulled the door open just wide enough to shine the flashlight through. What he saw made him freeze completely. A leopard sat on his porch, less than 10 feet away, her spotted coat silvered in the moonlight. But this wasn't a healthy, dangerous predator. She was heavily pregnant, her swollen belly hanging low, her sides heaving with each labored breath. Sweat matted the fur around her face and neck. The leopard didn't bolt. She didn't snarl or flatten her ears. Instead, she lifted her head and looked directly at Marcus with eyes that seemed impossibly human in their expression. They were wide, glassy with exhaustion, and filled with something he recognized immediately: a plea. She panted heavily, her pink tongue visible, her entire body trembling with effort. Marcus stood motionless, caught between instinct and disbelief. Every fiber of his training screamed at him to close the door, to call for backup, to not engage with a wild predator. But those eyes held him in place. She had come to him deliberately. She was asking for something he didn't yet understand, and the weight of that unspoken request settled over him like a physical presence. He didn't know whether to retreat or stay, but somehow, closing the door felt impossible. Marcus forced himself to breathe and look more carefully. The leopard's entire body was trembling, not just from exhaustion, but from something deeper, something rhythmic. As he watched, her swollen belly contracted visibly, the muscles rippling beneath her spotted coat. She lowered her head and let out a low, guttural sound, not a growl, but a vocalization of pure distress. It was a sound he had never heard from a wild animal before, something between a moan and a whimper. She shifted her weight and pawed weakly at the wooden planks of the porch, her claws scraping softly. The movement was uncoordinated, almost helpless. Another contraction seized her, stronger this time, and her hindquarters trembled violently. She panted harder, her mouth open wide, saliva dripping onto the wood. Marcus could see the whites of her eyes now, the universal sign of fear and pain in any creature. His heart clenched. He had seen enough births in the wild to recognize labor, but this was wrong. The contractions were too erratic, her distress too severe. Something wasn't progressing as it should. The leopard turned her head toward him again, and in that moment, Marcus understood with absolute clarity what was happening. She hadn't wandered here by accident. She hadn't come seeking food or shelter. She had come to him because she knew, somehow, that she needed help beyond her own instincts to survive this. The realization hit him with unexpected force. This wild predator, capable of taking down prey 3 times her size, was completely vulnerable. She was trapped in her own body, caught in a process that should have been natural but had become dangerous, and she had chosen to trust a human in her most desperate hour. Marcus felt his fear dissolving, replaced by something stronger: concern, responsibility. He stepped back from the door but didn't close it. His mind raced through possibilities. He couldn't deliver cubs. He had no training for that, but he knew someone who did. He pulled his phone from his pocket with shaking hands and scrolled through his contacts until he found Dr. Sarah Chen, the wildlife veterinarian who served the entire northern forest region. The leopard watched him, her breathing labored and desperate. Marcus pressed the call button and waited, his eyes never leaving the suffering mother on his porch. The phone rang 3 times before Dr. Chen answered, her voice thick with sleep. Marcus spoke quickly, keeping his voice low and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. A pregnant leopard, in active labor, on his porch. Something wrong. She needed to come immediately. There was a pause on the other end. Then Dr. Chen's voice sharpened with focus. She said she was leaving now, but it would take at least 2 hours to reach the station from her clinic. 2 hours felt like an eternity. As Marcus ended the call, the leopard lowered herself onto her side with a heavy exhale. The movement was slow and deliberate, as if every muscle had given up the fight to remain upright. She stretched out on the wooden planks, her swollen belly rising and falling with each labored breath. Her eyes remained open, fixed on the doorway where Marcus stood. He stepped closer to the threshold, close enough now to see details he had missed before. A dark stain was spreading slowly beneath her hindquarters. Blood, not a lot, but enough to confirm his worst fear. This wasn't just difficult labor. There were complications, internal injuries perhaps, or a cub positioned wrong. Without intervention, both the mother and her unborn young were in serious danger. Marcus knew the risks of staying near a wild predator, especially one in pain. Animals in distress were unpredictable, capable of lashing out at anyone close enough to reach. But looking at the leopard now, he couldn't bring himself to retreat inside and lock the door. She was too weak to be a threat. Her body trembled with each contraction, her paws twitching slightly but making no move toward aggression. He grabbed a blanket from the back of his chair and sat down just inside the doorway, close enough to watch but far enough to give her space. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The leopard's breathing was the loudest sound, ragged and strained. Marcus settled in to wait, his eyes never leaving the suffering mother. He didn't know what he could do for her beyond keeping watch, but leaving her alone felt impossible. So he stayed, a silent guardian in the doorway, counting the minutes until help could arrive. Time moved differently in the darkness. Marcus checked his phone every few minutes, but the clock seemed frozen. 20 minutes had passed since Dr. Chen's call. 100 minutes remained. The leopard lay on her side, her rib cage expanding and contracting with each difficult breath. Every 10 minutes or so, another contraction would seize her body. Her muscles would tense, her legs would stiffen, and that low, pained vocalization would escape her throat. Then the moment would pass, leaving her panting and trembling. Marcus sat cross-legged just inside the doorway, the door propped open with his boot. He had draped the blanket over his shoulders against the cool night air, but he barely noticed the temperature. His entire focus was on the suffering animal just beyond his threshold. She never tried to enter the station. She never showed aggression or even wariness. She simply endured, her body locked in a battle she was losing. Between contractions, she would turn her head slightly and look toward the door. Her golden eyes, reflecting the faint light from inside, would find Marcus and hold his gaze for a moment. It was as if she were checking, confirming that he hadn't left, that she wasn't alone. Each time their eyes met, Marcus felt the weight of her trust settle deeper into his chest. He started talking to her, without really thinking about it. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper. The words themselves meaningless, but the tone intentional. He told her help was coming. He told her she was strong. He told her she had made it this far, and that she could hold on just a little longer. He didn't know if she understood any of it, but it felt necessary to break the silence, to offer something beyond passive observation. The helplessness gnawed at him. He was a trained forest ranger, someone who had spent years learning to track, observe, and protect wildlife. But in this moment, all that knowledge felt useless. He couldn't ease her pain. He couldn't speed the birth or fix whatever was wrong. All he could do was sit and watch and wait, bearing witness to her struggle and hoping his presence provided some small comfort. The minutes crawled forward. The leopard labored on, and Marcus kept talking, his voice a quiet thread connecting them through the long, dark hours. 90 minutes had passed when the leopard's body went rigid with a contraction unlike the others. This one was stronger, more focused, her entire frame straining with effort. Marcus leaned forward instinctively, his breath catching. The leopard pushed, her hind legs bracing against the wooden planks, and then something emerged in a rush of fluid and membrane. A cub, tiny, impossibly small, its spotted coat slick and dark. The mother immediately twisted her body, ignoring her own exhaustion, and began licking the newborn with desperate urgency. Her rough tongue worked over the small form, trying to clear the membrane from its face, stimulating its chest and limbs. But the cub didn't move. It lay completely still, a fragile bundle no bigger than Marcus's hand. The mother licked harder, her movements growing frantic. She nudged the cub with her nose, rolled it gently with her paw, returned to licking its face and chest. Nothing. No breath. No movement. Marcus felt his heart crack open. He watched as the mother's efforts grew weaker, her own strength failing even as her determination remained absolute. She cleaned her cub with slowing strokes, pausing between each attempt to catch her ragged breath. Another contraction seized her, reminding her cruelly that her labor wasn't finished, but she ignored it, focused entirely on the silent newborn before her. Then she stopped, her tongue stilled mid-motion, and she lifted her head. Her eyes found Marcus in the doorway, and this time the look was different. It wasn't just awareness or checking his presence. It was direct, pleading, asking. She had done everything her instincts commanded, and it hadn't been enough. Now she was looking at him with an expression that transcended species, that spoke a language older than words. Marcus understood in that instant what she was asking. She knew he had hands that could do what her tongue and paws could not. She knew humans possessed knowledge beyond what the wild could teach. She had come to his door not just for shelter or witness, but for intervention only he could provide. He stood slowly, his decision made before his mind fully processed it. The mother watched him rise, her eyes never leaving his face, and in the space between them hung a question that demanded an answer only action could give. Headlights cut through the darkness, and moments later, Dr. Chin was striding toward the porch, her emergency kit in hand. She took in the scene with one sweeping glance: the laboring leopard, the motionless cub, Marcus standing frozen with helpless concern written across his face. She knelt immediately, her movements quick but controlled, her voice steady as she spoke. The first cub wasn't breathing. The mother was still in active labor, with a second cub stuck in the birth canal. They had minutes, not hours. Dr. Chin lifted the silent newborn with careful hands, tilting its head back to clear any fluid from its airway. She began compressions on the tiny chest with 2 fingers, counting under her breath, alternating with gentle puffs of air into the cub's nose. Marcus watched, his heart hammering. As she worked with focused precision, the cub remained limp and unresponsive. Meanwhile, the mother leopard contracted again, a deep shudder running through her body. Dr. Chen glanced at her, assessing, then spoke to Marcus, without looking away from the newborn. She needed him to keep the mother calm while she worked. Marcus moved slowly, positioning himself near the leopard's head. He began speaking to her in the same soft tone he had used all night, a continuous stream of quiet reassurance. The leopard's eyes found his, and incredibly, she didn't pull away. Doctor. Chin set down the first cub momentarily and turned her attention to the mother, her hands moving with gentle expertise to assist the delivery of the second cub. The leopard tensed, but didn't snap or struggle. She simply endured, her breathing ragged, her gaze locked on Marcus as if drawing strength from his presence. The second cub emerged in a rush, smaller than the first, wrapped in membrane. Doctor. Chin cleared its face quickly and began the same urgent resuscitation process, now working on 2 silent newborns simultaneously. Marcus kept talking, kept maintaining that fragile thread of calm between human and wild animal. Then, like a miracle breaking through darkness, the first cub gasped, a tiny, shuddering breath. Then another. Doctor. Chin's hands never stopped moving, working now on the second cub with renewed determination. The mother lifted her head slightly, watching, waiting. And when the second cub finally released its first weak cry, something shifted in the air. Relief, hope, the fragile promise of survival against impossible odds. The first cub's tiny chest rose with a sudden, shuddering breath. Then came a sound Marcus had been desperate to hear, a weak, mewling cry. The second cub followed moments later, its small mouth opening to release a thin, trembling wail. Doctor. Chen worked quickly but gently, clearing their airways and rubbing their bodies with soft towels to stimulate circulation. Both cubs squirmed weakly in her hands, their spotted coats still damp, their eyes sealed shut. They were alive. The mother leopard watched every movement, her head lifted just enough to see her newborns. She made a soft chuffing sound, a vocalization Marcus had never heard before, something between a purr and a whimper. Relief and exhaustion mixed in that single sound. Dr. Chen turned her attention to the mother, moving with careful deliberation. She examined the leopard's hindquarters, her expression growing serious as she identified the source of the bleeding, a significant tear from the traumatic delivery. Without treatment, the injury could have led to infection or fatal hemorrhaging. The leopard lay completely still as Dr. Chen worked, applying antiseptic and sutures with practiced efficiency. The animal was too exhausted to resist, her breathing shallow but steady. She simply endured, her eyes half closed, her body surrendered to the care she had sought. Marcus held a flashlight steady, providing light as Dr. Chen stitched and bandaged. When it was done, they moved together in quiet coordination. Marcus brought blankets and towels, creating a soft nest in the corner of the enclosed porch. Dr. Chen carefully placed both cubs in the center, their tiny bodies huddled together for warmth. The mother watched every action, tracking her babies with unwavering focus. Once the nest was ready, the leopard summoned strength. Marcus didn't think she still possessed. She dragged herself slowly across the porch, her movements labored and painful until she reached her cubs. She collapsed beside them, curling her body protectively around the mewling newborns. Immediately, they began rooting toward her warmth, their small mouths seeking milk. Marcus and Dr. Chen stepped back, giving the family space. They moved into the station proper, closing the inner door partway to provide privacy while still allowing them to monitor the situation. Through the gap, Marcus could see the mother's spotted flank rising and falling, her cubs tucked safely against her belly. Finally at peace, the days settled into a quiet rhythm. Marcus woke each morning and checked the porch from the window before entering, giving the leopard family privacy and space. The mother was always awake, always alert, her golden eyes tracking his movements through the glass. She would position herself between Marcus and her cubs, her body a living shield, but she no longer showed signs of stress at his presence. She had learned to distinguish between threat and care. Each day brought visible changes. The mother's strength returned steadily. On the first day, she barely lifted her head when nursing. By the second, she was grooming herself and her cubs with renewed vigor. By the third, she was standing and stretching, her muscles regaining their natural power and grace. The fierce protectiveness never wavered. When the cubs mewed, she responded immediately, curling around them with gentle precision. When they nursed, she watched the surroundings with unblinking vigilance. Marcus developed a careful routine. Twice a day, he would prepare fresh water in a low bowl and leave raw meat on a clean wooden board. He would open the porch door slowly, announce himself with a soft word, and place the offerings near the edge of the space before retreating. The mother would watch every movement, her ears forward, assessing intent. Once he withdrew, she would approach and eat with efficient hunger, never taking her focus completely off her cubs. On the third afternoon, as Marcus set down the water bowl, the leopard looked directly at him. Their eyes met and held, and in that moment, something passed between them that Marcus felt deep in his chest. It wasn't affection or friendship. Wild animals didn't form bonds with humans that way, and Marcus knew better than to romanticize what was happening. But there was recognition, acknowledgement. She knew what he had done, opening his door, calling for help, staying through her darkest hours. And he knew what she had trusted him to do, witness her vulnerability, touch her newborns, intervene when nature alone would have taken all 3 lives. The look lasted only seconds, then she returned her attention to her cubs. But it was enough. Marcus stepped back and closed the door, carrying that moment with him like a gift. 5 days had transformed everything. The mother leopard no longer lay in exhausted stillness. She moved around the enclosed porch with fluid grace, her steps sure and confident. The wound had healed cleanly, leaving only a thin line of scar tissue beneath her spotted coat. Her eyes had regained their sharp alertness, and when she groomed her cubs, there was strength in her movements, rather than desperation. The cubs had grown noticeably, their tiny bodies filling out with each nursing session. Their mewing had changed from weak, trembling cries to strong, demanding calls when they wanted their mother's attention. Their eyes remained sealed shut, but they crawled with increasing coordination, tumbling over each other in clumsy play. The spotted patterns on their coats had become more distinct, beautiful miniature replicas of their mother's markings. Dr. Chin had returned that morning for a final examination. She handled the mother with professional calm, checking the surgical site, listening to her heart and lungs, assessing her overall condition. The leopard tolerated the examination with patient stillness, as if she understood this was part of the care that had saved her. When Dr. Chin stepped back and nodded, Marcus knew what that gesture meant, even before she spoke the words. The mother was healed. She was strong enough to hunt, to protect her cubs, to return to the wild where she belonged. Marcus stood at the window, watching the small family through the glass. The mother was grooming one cub, while the other nursed, a picture of maternal devotion and wild resilience. Pride swelled in his chest, fierce and overwhelming. This leopard had trusted him in her darkest moment, and together with Dr. Chin, they had saved 3 lives. But alongside that pride ran a current of sadness he couldn't quite name. He had known from the beginning that this arrangement was temporary. Wild animals belonged in the forest, not on human porches. The mother would leave when she was ready, taking her cubs to raise them in the territory she knew. That was the right outcome, the only outcome. But watching them now, knowing these might be his last hours with this remarkable family, Marcus felt the weight of approaching loss. He had been given a gift, a glimpse into a bond that transcended species, a trust that defied every instinct. Soon, that gift would walk back into the forest and disappear. Marcus woke to silence. Not the comfortable quiet of early morning, but an absence that felt profound. He knew before he even opened his eyes that something had changed. Rising from his bed, he walked to the porch door and looked through the window. The enclosed space was empty. The nest of blankets lay undisturbed but abandoned, still holding the impression where 3 bodies had rested through the night. He opened the door slowly and stepped onto the porch. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. In the pale light of dawn, he could see tracks clearly marked in the fine dust that had settled over the wooden planks. One set of large paw prints led from the nest toward the forest edge. Beside them, 2 impossibly tiny sets of tracks followed, each print no bigger than a coin. The cubs had walked on their own, guided by their mother into the wilderness that was their birthright. Marcus followed the tracks with his eyes until they disappeared into the undergrowth. She had chosen her moment perfectly, leaving at dawn when the forest was quiet, when her cubs were strong enough to make the journey but still small enough to carry if needed. She had made her decision and executed it with the same quiet determination she had shown when she first appeared at his door. He turned back toward the porch and noticed something he had almost missed. On the exact spot where she had given birth, pressed deliberately into the dust, was a single perfect paw print. It was deeper than the walking tracks, made with intentional pressure. The pad and 4 toe marks were clearly defined, as if she had paused there one final time and pressed down, leaving this mark before departing. Marcus knelt beside it, his throat tightening. He reached out and traced the outline with his finger, careful not to disturb its shape. Some might call it coincidence, an accident of movement, but Marcus knew better. This was acknowledgement. This was gratitude expressed in the only language she had. She had come to him in her darkest moment, carrying nothing but desperation and an impossible trust, and he had not failed her. The paw print remained as proof not of dominance or ownership, but of a connection that transcended every boundary between their worlds. He had been chosen, and he had answered. That truth would stay with him long after the dust settled and the print faded away.